Why did Albert Einstein, the man who unraveled the secrets of the universe, lose more than half of his friends after winning the Nobel Prize? The answer will shock you because it reveals a brutal truth about human nature that most people prefer to ignore. Einstein discovered that success functions like a falseness detector. It doesn't change the people around you, it simply reveals who they really always were. When Einstein began gaining worldwide recognition for his revolutionary discoveries, something disturbing happened. Colleagues who used to seek him out for scientific discussions began treating him with strange coldness. Friends who used to invite him to dinners simply stopped calling. And most painful of all, people he trusted began spreading rumors about his personality, questioning whether he really deserved all that recognition. Einstein, being Einstein, didn't accept this as part of life. He applied the same scientific curiosity he used to understand the cosmos, to decipher human behavior. And what he discovered was as precise as his equations about relativity. There are specific and predictable patterns that instantly reveal whether someone is a true friend or a false friend. Have you ever felt that strange sensation when you tell good news to someone close and the reaction isn't what you expected? That smile that doesn't reach the eyes, that's nice without real emotion. Or worse, that question disguised as concern that actually questions whether you deserve what you achieved. If you've experienced this, Einstein would perfectly understand your experience. The truth is that false friends aren't obvious. If they were, it would be easy to identify them. They're subtle, strategic, and often are precisely the people closest to you. They know exactly what to say, how to act, which mask to wear in each situation. That's why most people only discover they had false friends when it's too late. When the betrayal has already happened, when the damage has been done, when years of energy have been wasted feeding one-sided relationships. But Einstein developed something revolutionary, a scientific method to identify falseness before it could cause damage. He discovered that there are 3 specific questions, not questions you ask directly to the person, but questions you ask yourself while observing specific behaviors that reveal with surgical precision the true intentions of any person. These 3 questions are so effective, they function like an emotional lie detector. They reveal not only who the false friends are, but also why they act this way, what the hidden motivation is behind the masks they use, and most importantly, how you can protect yourself without becoming a closed or distrustful person. Most fascinating is that Einstein didn't develop this method out of paranoia or bitterness. He developed it out of scientific necessity, the same mind that needed absolute precision to understand the laws of the universe applied that precision to understand the laws of human behavior. And today, you're going to discover exactly how this method works, because the first of these 3 questions will reveal something about your relationships that you may never have noticed before. But before revealing these 3 questions that changed not only Einstein's life, but my own life and that of thousands of people who applied this method, I need to make a request that might seem simple, but makes all the difference. If you've come this far, if you recognize that you need to learn to identify false people before they cause damage in your life, leave your like on this video now. It's not just to help the channel. It's for you to commit to this discovery. It's your way of saying, yes, I want to learn. I'm willing to see my relationships with more clarity. And more importantly, write in the comments, I've felt this, if you've experienced discovering that someone close wasn't who you thought they were. It could have been that friend who disappeared when you needed them most, or that person who reacted strangely when you achieved something important, or even someone you discovered talking badly about you behind your back. Don't be ashamed. We've all been through this. In fact, that's exactly why we're here. When you write this publicly, you're not just commenting, you're liberating yourself. You're admitting there's room to grow, that you deserve better, more genuine relationships. And mainly, you're connecting with thousands of other people who lived the same pain of discovering they trusted the wrong person. Because here's how it is. This isn't just another channel that throws pretty phrases at you. We're a community of people who understood that to have an extraordinary life, we first need to learn to identify and protect ourselves from people who drain our energy and sabotage our growth. People who understood that emotional intelligence isn't optional, it's fundamental. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, click the subscribe button now. It's not just because you'll receive notifications of upcoming videos. It's because you're declaring that you're part of a select group of people who want to apply the wisdom of history's greatest geniuses to transform their lives. You're saying you refuse to continue being an ordinary person who accepts toxic relationships and gets ordinary results. Every video we post here is a masterclass based on the teachings of the greatest geniuses, scientists, philosophers, and leaders who ever existed. Einstein is just the beginning. We have Tesla revealing how to identify manipulators, Darwin showing how to evolve emotionally, and an entire library of wisdom that can completely transform your way of relating. Now, back to Einstein's 3 questions. The first one is so simple you can apply it today, but so revealing it will make you rethink at least 3 people in your close circle. The first question Einstein developed was born from a painful experience he lived shortly after receiving recognition for his special theory of relativity. He had invited a group of physicist colleagues, people he considered close friends, to a small celebration at his house. Einstein was genuinely excited to share this moment with people he believed were rooting for him. But something strange happened during that night that forever changed how Einstein viewed human relationships. When he began talking about his discoveries, about the possibilities this opened for physics, about the invitations he was receiving from prestigious universities, Einstein noticed a subtle but unmistakable change in the environment. The smiles seemed forced. The questions sounded more like interrogations than genuine curiosity. And most disturbing, some people began making comments that seemed like compliments, but were actually disguised diminishments. "What luck you had thinking of that first, Albert," said a colleague with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I imagine how many people were close to discovering the same thing," commented another, as if Einstein's years of work were just a matter of timing. "I hope all this fame doesn't go to your head," completed a third, planting the seed of doubt about whether Einstein really deserved that recognition. That night, alone in his office after everyone had left, Einstein had an epiphany that would be as revolutionary as his scientific discoveries. He realized he had just conducted an unplanned experiment on human nature. And the results were as clear as a mathematical equation. Some people can only be genuinely happy for others when those others are below them. That's how Einstein's first question was born. How does this person react when something good happens to me? Not how they say they react or how they should react, but how they really, genuinely, instinctively react when you prosper, when you grow, when you achieve something significant. Einstein began paying scientific attention to these reactions. He noticed that true friends have an immediate and spontaneous response of genuine joy. Their eyes shine, the smile is natural, questions come from real curiosity about how you achieved it, not from investigation about whether you really deserve it. They want details because they feel inspired, not because they're looking for flaws in your story. False friends, Einstein discovered, follow a pattern so predictable he could have created a mathematical formula. First, there's always a small pause, a fraction of a second where they process the information and decide which mask to use. Then comes the rehearsed smile, followed by words that are technically congratulatory, but carry subtle thorns of questioning or diminishment. Most fascinating is that Einstein realized this reaction from false friends wasn't necessarily conscious malice. It was something more primitive, more automatic. It was as if others' success activated an internal alarm in these people, an alarm that screamed, "This person is leaving me behind," or "Why them and not me?" And the way they found to calm this alarm was to diminish, somehow, the other person's achievement. Einstein began testing this first question scientifically. When he had a minor discovery, he told different people at different times and observed the reactions with the same precision he used to observe physical phenomena. And the results were consistent. Genuine people reacted with real enthusiasm, while false friends always found a subtle way to minimize or question. Think about the last time you had an important achievement, a promotion, a new relationship, a project that worked out, anything that left you genuinely happy. Now remember the reactions of close people. How many reacted as if the victory were theirs too? How many asked questions because they wanted to understand how they could grow too? And how many, in some subtle way, found a way to question, minimize, or make the situation about themselves? If you're recognizing patterns while reflecting on this, write "I tested people" in the comments, because Einstein knew that recognizing these patterns is the first step to protecting yourself from them. And get ready, because the second question Einstein developed will reveal something even more shocking about how to identify who really cares about you. The second question Einstein developed arose from an even more disturbing discovery than the first. And this happened a few months after that revealing party, when Einstein went through a difficult period that tested not only his scientific genius, but mainly his ability to distinguish who really cared about him as a person versus who only cared about what he could offer. Einstein had contracted an illness that left him bedridden for several weeks. Nothing serious, but enough to cancel commitments, lectures, important meetings. For the first time in a long time, Albert Einstein couldn't do anything for anyone. He couldn't review colleagues' articles, couldn't make recommendations to universities, couldn't open doors or connect influential people. He was just vulnerable, needing care, temporarily unable to be useful. And it was during this period that Einstein made a discovery that shocked him deeply. Most people who used to seek him out regularly simply disappeared. Not literally, of course. If he got in touch, they would respond politely, ask about his health, show appropriate concern, but the difference was in initiative. Who took the initiative to reach out to him now that he had nothing to offer besides his company? Einstein began to perceive a devastating pattern. Colleagues who used to call constantly to exchange ideas stopped calling. Acquaintances who always appeared with interesting projects vanished. Even some he considered close friends seemed to have developed temporary amnesia about his existence, as if Einstein was only worthy of attention when he was at the peak of his productivity and influence. But there were exceptions. A few people continued appearing, calling, visiting, without any hidden agenda, without needing anything specific. They came just because they cared about him as a human being. And this stark difference between the two groups inspired Einstein to develop his second fundamental question. Does this person only seek me out when they need something, or do they genuinely value my company? Einstein realized this question was like an emotional X-ray. It instantly revealed the difference between people who see you as a resource to be exploited versus people who see you as a human being to be valued. And most revealing, the answer to this question didn't depend on what people said, but on what they did when they thought you weren't paying attention. Think for a moment. How many people in your life only get in touch when they need something? It could be a favor, advice, a referral, a connection, or even just someone to vent their problems to. They appear when they're in crisis, when they need validation, when they want something specific. But when was the last time these people got in touch just to know how you are, without any specific need? Einstein developed what he called the inverted availability test. Instead of always being available to everyone, he began observing who really cared about his emotional availability. Who asked if he was okay? Who offered help without being asked? Who appeared during difficult times, even when they couldn't gain anything from it? The most painful discovery was realizing that many people he considered close friends were, in fact, what we might call emotional vampires today. They appeared when they needed energy, attention, advice, connections. But when Einstein needed energy, attention, or support, these same people mysteriously became too busy or simply didn't notice he was in need. Einstein noticed that genuine people have a very specific characteristic. They offer before asking. They notice when you're going through a difficult time and appear with simple but meaningful gestures. A phone call for no specific reason, an unexpected visit, a message just to know how you are. They invest in the relationship even when they don't need to withdraw anything from it. False friends, Einstein discovered, follow the opposite pattern. They always appear when they need something and disappear when you need something. It's as if they had an extremely selective emotional radar. They immediately detect when you can be useful, but become completely blind when you need support. Most insidious is that many false friends became masters at disguising their self-interested approaches. They call asking how you are, show genuine interest for a few minutes, and only after establishing a pleasant atmosphere do they reveal the real reason for the call, as if those initial minutes of care were payment for the favors that follow. Einstein learned to identify these patterns by observing the frequency and timing of contacts. Genuine people have a more consistent and less utilitarian frequency. They appear at random times, without specific reasons, just because they thought of you. False friends have a frequency directly proportional to their needs. They appear more when they're in crisis and disappear when they're well resolved. If you're doing this mental calculation now, analyzing the frequency and reasons why people seek you out, write "I analyze frequencies" in the comments. And get ready, because Einstein's third question is even more revealing and has to do with something he discovered about how people talk about others when they think nobody is listening. The third question Einstein developed arose from an accidental discovery that made him question years of relationships he considered solid. And this discovery happened in the most unexpected way possible. Einstein overheard, unintentionally, a conversation that wasn't meant for him to hear. It was an ordinary afternoon at the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton. Einstein was walking through the corridors when he realized he had forgotten some documents in a meeting room. As he approached to get them, he heard familiar voices coming from inside the room. They were two colleagues he had dined with the previous week, people he considered close, who always showed themselves cordial and respectful in his presence. But what Einstein heard in those minutes forever changed his perspective on human nature. Those same colleagues were making derogatory comments about a third colleague, someone Einstein also knew well. They weren't just professional criticisms, they were personal attacks, malicious comments about the personality, appearance, insecurities of that absent person. And what shocked Einstein most was the naturalness, the almost sadistic pleasure with which they dissected the defects of someone they considered a friend. Einstein was paralyzed not only by the content of the conversation, but by a devastating realization that took over his mind. If these two spoke so easily about an absent person this way, how easily would they speak about him the same way? If they were capable of smiling in someone's face during dinner and tearing that person apart behind their back the next day, what guarantee did he have that he wasn't treated the same way? In that moment, Einstein understood something fundamental about human psychology that would become his third most revealing question. How does this person talk about others when they're not present? Because Einstein discovered a universal law of human behavior as precise as his laws of physics. The way someone treats third parties in their absence is exactly how they will treat you in your absence. Einstein began paying scientific attention to this pattern. He noticed that people who systematically spoke badly about others to him followed predictable behavior. They always started with something like, "You know, I really like so-and-so, but," or, "I don't want to speak ill, but don't you think that," as if this preamble of false consideration justified the slander that followed. Even more disturbing, Einstein realized these people seemed to feel genuine pleasure in sharing negative information about others. They leaned forward, lowered their voices as if they were sharing a valuable secret, and observed his reactions with an intensity that bordered on emotional voyeurism, as if the destruction of others' reputations were a form of entertainment. Einstein developed what he called the absent third-party test. But whenever he was in conversations where someone began speaking negatively about an absent person, he paid attention not only to what was said, but how it was said, the pleasure the person showed in saying it, the ease with which they broke the trust of someone who wasn't there to defend themselves. And Einstein made a discovery that gave him chills. The people who most quickly spoke badly about others to him were exactly the same ones who most demonstrated friendship when those people were present. It was as if they were specialists in emotional theatricality, capable of alternating between characters depending on the audience. Think about the people around you who always have something negative to say about third parties. Those who come to you with gossip, with criticism, with concerns about others, who always know about some defect, some flaw, some problem in the lives of absent people. Now imagine, if they speak so easily about others to you, how do you think they speak about you to others? Einstein realized that genuine people have a specific characteristic. They protect the reputation of absent people. When someone tries to pull a negative conversation about a third party, they redirect, defend, or simply refuse to participate. They instinctively understand that participating in someone's reputation destruction is a form of betrayal, even if that person isn't present to notice. False friends, Einstein discovered, are collectors of others' defects. They seem to have a mental file of every problem, every insecurity, every flaw of the people around them. And more frightening, they use this information as social trading currency, sharing secrets and weaknesses to feel important, relevant, in the know about things. Einstein developed a personal rule that completely changed his relationships. He stopped trusting personal information to any person who showed pleasure in speaking negatively about third parties. Because if someone is capable of betraying the trust of absent people, there's nothing preventing that person from betraying your trust the same way. Most revealing is that Einstein noticed that when he refused to participate in slanderous conversations, when he changed the subject or defended the absent person, false friends reacted with visible disappointment, as if they had lost an opportunity for entertainment or to create complicity through the destruction of third parties. If you're thinking now about people who always have something negative to tell about others, write "I recognize collectors" in the comments. And now we reach the most fascinating point: how Einstein applied these three questions practically, because he didn't ask these questions directly. That would be too obvious. Instead, he created natural situations where the answers revealed themselves. How Einstein applied these three questions practically was perhaps the most brilliant part of his entire method, because Einstein understood something fundamental about human nature. When you ask direct questions about character, people automatically put on their most convincing masks. Everyone knows the correct answers to give. Everyone can pretend to be a good friend when being openly tested. So, Einstein developed what he called invisible social experiments. Natural and apparently casual situations where true personalities revealed themselves without people realizing they were being observed. It was like studying animal behavior in nature, where subjects act naturally because they don't know they're being studied. To test the first question, how people react to your success, Einstein developed a technique he called staggered revelation. Instead of announcing big achievements to everyone at the same time, He told his good news to different people at different times and observed reactions with the precision of a scientist analyzing experimental data. When Einstein received an invitation to a prestigious conference, for example, he didn't make a general announcement. Instead, he mentioned it casually during individual conversations. "Oh, by the way, I was invited to speak at the Berlin Physics Conference." Then he observed. Was the reaction genuinely enthusiastic? Did the person ask questions out of real curiosity or invasion? Was there a strange pause before the answer? Did the eyes shine with joy or narrow with something that seemed like disguised irritation? Einstein discovered that genuine people had spontaneous and immediate reactions. They leaned forward, interested. They asked questions about how he got the invitation, what he planned to present, if he was excited. False friends had a micro-expression of unpleasant surprise, followed by a controlled smile and comments that started with, "How nice," but quickly derived into subtle questioning or comparisons that diminished the achievement. To test the second question, about frequency and reasons for contact, Einstein used what he called the temporary unavailability test. He simply stopped being available to certain people for determined periods. Not dramatically or obviously, but naturally. He stopped returning calls immediately, responding to letters at the usual speed, taking initiative in contacts. And then he observed who continued trying genuine contact, who appeared even when he wasn't being super responsive. And most revealing, when these people finally managed to talk to him, what was the first subject? Was it genuine concern for his well-being, or was it some specific need that had motivated the persistence? Einstein noticed fascinating patterns. Genuine people showed real concern when he was less available. They asked if everything was okay, if he was going through some difficult moment, if he needed anything. False friends showed poorly disguised irritation at the unavailability and quickly revealed the agenda that had motivated them to insist on contact. To test the third question, how people speak about absent third parties, Einstein developed perhaps his most sophisticated technique. He simply remained in strategic silence. When someone began speaking negatively about an absent person, instead of participating in the conversation or changing the subject, Einstein just listened. He asked neutral questions that allowed the person to continue talking, revealing more and more about their true nature. "Interesting. Tell me more about that," Einstein would say when someone started gossip. Or, "How did you reach that conclusion?" when someone made a harsh judgment about a third party. These neutral questions functioned like keys that unlocked people's true thoughts about others. Einstein discovered something disturbing. People who really felt pleasure in destroying others' reputations couldn't resist an apparently interested listener. They got excited, shared increasingly intimate details, revealed information they had clearly obtained through breaks of trust. It was as if they were addicted to the sensation of power that comes from possessing and sharing others' secrets and weaknesses. The most brilliant aspect of Einstein's method was that he never confronted anyone directly. He never accused someone of being a false friend or of having failed his tests. Instead, he simply adjusted the level of trust and intimacy he offered to each person, based on the results of his observations. If someone consistently showed negative reactions to his successes, Einstein stopped sharing good news with that person. If someone only appeared when they needed something, Einstein became less available for favors. If someone showed pleasure in destroying third parties, Einstein stopped sharing personal information that could be used against him later. This gradual and scientific approach allowed Einstein to protect his emotional energy without creating unnecessary drama or burning professional bridges. People simply realized, over time, that they were less close to Einstein than they imagined, but couldn't identify a specific moment of confrontation or rejection. If you're thinking about applying these observation techniques in your own relationships, write, "I will observe scientifically" in the comments. And now we reach the most revealing part, the specific patterns Einstein identified in false friends, because he discovered they follow behaviors as predictable as the laws of physics. The specific patterns Einstein identified in false friends were so consistent and predictable that he joked about being able to create a periodic table of human falseness. Strange and most fascinating is that these patterns repeated regardless of social class, education, profession, or apparent sophistication of people. As if falseness were governed by natural laws as universal as gravity. The first pattern Einstein catalogued was what he called stolen spotlight syndrome. False friends have an almost compulsive need to redirect attention to themselves whenever you're receiving recognition. If you tell about an achievement, they immediately find a way to tell about a bigger or more impressive achievement. If you're going through a difficult moment, they quickly share an even more difficult moment they lived through. Einstein first noticed this during a dinner where he was telling about a scientific discovery he had made. A colleague he considered close listened for exactly 30 seconds before interrupting with, "That reminds me of when I discovered..." And for the next 20 minutes, that man monopolized the conversation talking about his own achievements, as if Einstein's discovery were just a springboard for him to shine. The second pattern was even more subtle. Invisible competition. False friends treat relationships like zero-sum games, where one person's success automatically means the other's diminishment. They can't genuinely celebrate your victories because in their distorted minds, your victories represent their defeats. It's as if there were a limited amount of success in the world, and anything you gain is something they lose. Einstein realized this when he noticed that certain people always found a way to diminish his achievements through comparisons. How nice that you were invited to that conference. I was invited to a similar one last year, but it was a bit more prestigious. Or congratulations on the publication. It must be gratifying to have your work accepted in a journal of that level, where that level carried a subtle connotation that it wasn't the highest possible level. The third pattern Einstein identified was what he called validation vampirism. False friends are addicted to extracting emotional validation from others, but are incapable of offering genuine validation back. They come to you loaded with dramas, problems, crises that need to be resolved, or at least heard with total attention. But when you need emotional support, they mysteriously become unavailable or change the subject. Einstein vividly remembered an acquaintance who appeared in his office whenever he was going through some personal or professional crisis. This man could talk for hours about his problems, his frustrations, his worries. Einstein listened patiently, offered advice, made his emotional energy available. But when Einstein mentioned his own concerns or challenges, the same man quickly found an excuse to leave or redirected the conversation back to his own problems. The fourth pattern was perhaps the most disturbing: strategic information collection. False friends ask questions that seem interested and caring, but are actually ways to collect information that can be used later, whether for gossip, personal gain, or even subtle sabotage. Einstein noticed these people were masters at asking questions that sounded like genuine care, but were actually disguised invasions. How are you dealing with the pressure of success? Don't you feel isolated sometimes? Isn't it difficult to maintain relationships when you're so focused on work? Questions that seemed empathetic, but were clearly fishing for information about his vulnerabilities, insecurities, or weak points. The fifth pattern Einstein catalogued was conditional loyalty. False friends are loyal only while it's convenient for them. Their friendship exists only while you can offer something, whether status by association, professional opportunities, social connections, or even just entertainment. The moment you stop being useful, or worse, the moment you need something from them that requires real sacrifice, they simply evaporate. Einstein discovered this most painfully during a period when he was being publicly attacked for his political positions. People who used to be proud to be seen with him at social events, who always mentioned their friendship with the famous Einstein, suddenly became unavailable. They didn't declare open opposition. That would be too obvious. They simply stopped returning calls, cancelled social commitments, found excuses not to be seen publicly with him. Most shocking for Einstein was realizing how these patterns were automatic and unconscious in most people who manifested them. It wasn't that they woke up in the morning planning to be false or manipulative. It was as if these behaviors were deep programming that activated automatically whenever they felt threatened by someone close who was growing or shining more than them. If you're recognizing these patterns in people around you, if you're making connections you maybe didn't want to make, write, "I see the patterns" in the comments. And now we reach the point that changed everything for Einstein, how he dealt emotionally with these discoveries, because realizing that many of his relationships were based on falseness could have made Einstein a bitter and distrustful person. How Einstein dealt emotionally with these discoveries could have resulted in a completely different story. Any normal person who discovered that many of their relationships were based on self-interest and falseness would have two obvious options: become bitter and distrustful of everyone, or deny reality and continue being naive. But Einstein, being Einstein, chose a third path that changed not only his social life, but his fundamental understanding of human nature. Einstein's first reaction, he admitted years later in his personal memoirs, was profound sadness. Not anger, sadness. Because Einstein realized that people who demonstrated these patterns of falseness weren't necessarily evil by nature. They were, most of the time, profoundly insecure, lacking their own purpose, addicted to external validation. False behaviors were symptoms of empty inner lives, not necessarily conscious malice. Einstein wrote in his personal diary, "I discovered that the people who most try to diminish me are those who most diminish themselves internally. Their falseness with me is just a reflection of how they are false with themselves. How can I feel anger towards someone who is clearly suffering from such profound spiritual poverty?" This perspective changed everything. Instead of seeing false friends as enemies to be fought, Einstein began seeing them as lost people who needed to be understood, but not necessarily welcomed into his inner circle. It was like having compassion for someone who is sick, without necessarily wanting to expose yourself to the disease. Einstein developed what he called compassionate distancing. He didn't cut people abruptly or create dramas confronting their falseness. Instead, he simply adjusted the level of intimacy and trust he offered to each person, based on what he had observed about their characters. For people who demonstrated patterns of falseness, Einstein became cordial but superficial. He continued being polite, professional, even friendly on social occasions, but he stopped sharing personal information, trusting secrets, making himself emotionally available. It was as if he had created a lighter version of himself for these interactions, real enough to be authentic but protected enough to avoid manipulation. More importantly, Einstein developed genuine gratitude for these discoveries. He realized that knowing the true nature of people was a gift, not a curse. It was better to know who he could really count on than to live in an illusion of relationships that didn't really exist. Einstein began seeing his social experiments not as tests to judge people, but as ways to better care for his own emotional energy. He understood he had a responsibility to himself to protect his ability to give his best to the world, and that meant being selective about where he invested his relational energy. And then something extraordinary happened. When Einstein stopped wasting emotional energy on false relationships, when he stopped trying to convince uninterested people to become genuinely interested in him, he created space for real relationships. With all that energy he previously spent managing falseness, Einstein could invest more deeply in people who truly valued his company. Einstein discovered that there were people, fewer in number but infinitely more valuable, who passed all his tests without even knowing they were being tested. People who genuinely rejoiced in his successes, who appeared without hidden agenda, who protected his reputation even when he wasn't present to notice. And with these people, Einstein could build relationships of a depth and authenticity he had never experienced before. He realized that quality always surpasses quantity in relationships. It was better to have 5 true friends than 50 false acquaintances. Better to have genuine conversations with few people than social theatricalities with crowds. Einstein also developed a personal rule that changed his life. He stopped trying to convert false friends into true friends. He stopped believing that if he were kind enough, useful enough, available enough, he could transform self-interest into genuine affection. He accepted that some people simply didn't have the emotional capacity or maturity for authentic relationships, and that wasn't his responsibility to fix. More liberating still, Einstein stopped feeling guilty about not being available to everyone. He understood that saying no to relationships that drained his energy wasn't selfishness. It was intelligent self-care that allowed him to say yes with more fullness to relationships that really mattered. If you're feeling that relief of realizing you can be selective about your relationships, that you can protect your energy without feeling guilty, write "I choose quality" in the comments. And now we reach the most practical point: how you can start applying Einstein's 3 questions in your life immediately, because his method can be adapted to any modern social situation. How you can start applying Einstein's 3 questions in your life immediately is simpler than it seems, but requires something most people find difficult: scientific patience. Einstein knew that revealing people's true nature doesn't happen overnight. It's a process of careful observation over time. And most importantly, you can't be obvious about what you're doing, or people will put on their best masks. The first question, how does this person react when something good happens to me, can be tested through what I call the staggered achievement test. Instead of announcing big victories to everyone at the same time, share good news with different people at different moments. It can be something simple: a promotion at work, a personal project that worked out, a compliment you received, even a small achievement like learning a new skill. The secret is in observing micro-reactions. Genuine people have what psychologists call spontaneous joy reaction. Eyes immediately shine, smile is natural, they lean forward interested. False friends have an almost imperceptible pause, a fraction of a second where they process the information and decide which mask to use. Then comes the controlled smile and comments that are technically positive but carry subtle thorns. Pay attention also to the questions they ask. True friends ask questions out of genuine curiosity. How did you achieve it? How do you feel? What does this mean for you? False friends ask investigative questions. Will it last? Won't it be too stressful? Are you sure you're prepared? As if they were looking for holes in your story or planting seeds of doubt. The second question, about frequency and reasons for contact, requires what Einstein called pattern analysis over time. Start paying attention to when people seek you out. Create a mental list, or even physical, of how many times each close person contacts you and what is generally the reason. You can do this discreetly by observing your message history, calls, invitations. Who seeks you out only when they need something? A favor, advice, a connection, even just someone to vent to. And who seeks you out without specific reason, just to know how you are, to share something interesting, or simply because they thought of you? Also, try the temporary unavailability test Einstein used. For a few weeks, be a little less responsive. Don't answer all messages immediately. Take a bit longer to return calls. Be less proactive in initiating contacts. Observe. Who shows genuine concern about your reduced availability, and who shows irritation because you're not being useful at the usual speed? The third question, how people talk about absent third parties, is perhaps the easiest to test, because you don't need to create any special situation, you just need to pay attention to what already happens naturally. When someone starts speaking negatively about an absent person, instead of participating or changing the subject, simply listen with scientific attention. Use active listening techniques like, interesting, or tell me more about that. Neutral phrases that encourage the person to continue talking without you endorsing or condemning what's being said. You'll be shocked at how much people reveal about themselves when they have an apparently interested listener. Observe not just what is said, but how it's said. Is there pleasure in the person's voice when sharing negative information? Do they lean forward, lower their voice, show excitement when telling gossip? Or do they show genuine discomfort and try to quickly change the subject when someone tries to pull negative conversations about third parties? Einstein discovered you can adapt these tests to the modern digital world too. Observe how people react to your social media posts when you share achievements. Who comments genuinely celebrating? Who makes comments that seem like compliments but carry subtle diminishments? And who simply completely ignores your good news but appears immediately when you post something about difficulties or problems? Also, analyze your WhatsApp groups, your private conversations. Who sends you messages only when they need something? Who initiates conversations by sharing gossip or speaking negatively about other group members? And who really takes interest in your life without hidden agenda? Most importantly, apply these tests with patience and without emotional judgment. The goal isn't to catch anyone being false or create drama. The goal is to collect information to make more intelligent decisions about where to invest your emotional energy and with whom it's worth building deeper relationships. Einstein always remembered that these tests should be applied over time, not in a single interaction. Everyone can have a bad day, a strange reaction, a moment of selfishness. Patterns reveal themselves in behavioral consistency, not in isolated incidents. If you're mentally preparing to start observing these patterns in your relationships, if you feel you're ready to apply Einstein's scientific methodology to your relationships, write, "I will apply the tests" in the comments. And now we reach something Einstein discovered that will change your perspective forever. What to do with the information you discover, because knowing who the false friends are is only half the equation. What to do with the information you discover through Einstein's tests is where many people make the most devastating mistake of the entire process. And Einstein learned this the most painful way possible when, full of youthful indignation, he decided to directly confront the first people who failed his character tests. Einstein remembers that at 28 years old, still naive about the complexities of human nature, he decided to have an honest conversation with a colleague who had demonstrated all the patterns of falseness we identified. Einstein presented evidence, cited specific examples, rationally explained why that behavior was harmful to authentic relationships. He believed, with the innocence typical of a scientific genius, that if he just showed the facts to the person, they would recognize their mistakes and change. The result was disastrous. The colleague not only denied all of Einstein's observations, but felt deeply offended by being analyzed and judged. Worse still, this person began spreading to other colleagues that Einstein had become paranoid, arrogant, obsessive about relationships. From victim of false behavior, Einstein became the villain of the story. It was in this devastating experience that Einstein learned the golden rule of dealing with discoveries about human character. Never directly confront false friends about their falseness. Because false friends, by definition, are experts in denial, manipulation, and narrative inversion. They will always find a way to make themselves victims and transform you into the aggressor. Einstein then developed what he called the silent adjustment strategy. Instead of confronting or cutting people dramatically, he simply adjusted the level of intimacy, trust, and availability he offered to each person based on what he had discovered about their characters. For people who failed the tests but were professionally or socially important, Einstein developed what he called protective cordiality. He continued being polite, professional, even friendly. But he stopped sharing personal information, trusting secrets, making himself emotionally available. It was as if he had created a social version of himself, real enough to be authentic, but protected enough to avoid manipulation. The brilliance of this approach is that it avoids all the drama and confrontation that comes from cutting people abruptly, but still protects your emotional energy and personal information. People notice that you're no longer as close as before, but can't point to a specific moment of rejection or conflict. For people who passed Einstein's tests, those precious and rare ones who demonstrated consistent genuineness, he did the opposite. He invested more deeply, shared more, made himself more available. Einstein discovered that when you stop wasting energy on false relationships, you have much more quality energy to invest in true relationships. Einstein also developed what he called stratified information policy. He created different levels of personal information that he shared with different levels of relationship. Superficial information for casual acquaintances, moderate information for professional colleagues, deep information only for the inner circle that had passed all tests over time. This didn't mean being false or secretive. It meant being intelligent about vulnerability. Einstein understood that sharing intimate information is a form of power, and this power should only be offered to people who had demonstrated deserving it through consistent behavior. The most liberating aspect of this approach is that it eliminates the need to feel guilty about not being available to everyone. Einstein stopped believing he had an obligation to be equally open and accessible to all people in his life. He understood that different people deserved different levels of access to him, based on what they demonstrated through their actions. Einstein also developed a personal rule about not trying to save or convert false friends. He stopped believing that if he were kind enough, patient enough, or useful enough, he could transform self-interested people into genuine friends. He accepted that some people simply don't have emotional capacity for authentic relationships, and that wasn't his responsibility to fix. More importantly, Einstein learned to see these discoveries as valuable information, not as personal tragedies. Knowing the truth about people's character was a gift that allowed more intelligent decisions about where to invest time, energy, and trust. If you're realizing you can apply this silent adjustment strategy in your own relationships, that you can be selective about intimacy without creating drama, write "I will adjust silently" in the comments. And now we reach the most surprising discovery of Einstein. What happened when he stopped accepting falseness and began attracting only genuine people? What happened when Einstein stopped accepting falseness and began attracting only genuine people was a transformation so profound that he himself was surprised by the results. And this change didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual process that revealed something fascinating about how the energy we invest in false relationships literally blocks our capacity to form authentic connections. Einstein began noticing the first signs of this transformation about 6 months after implementing his silent adjustment strategy. With all that energy he previously spent managing false people, trying to maintain one-sided relationships, dealing with unnecessary dramas, and navigating complex emotional games, Einstein suddenly had an abundance of emotional energy he didn't quite know how to use. The first thing he noticed was a dramatic improvement in his ability to concentrate. Without the constant drain of toxic relationships, without the need to always be alert for subtle manipulations, without the emotional fatigue of dealing with people who sucked his energy, Einstein discovered he could focus on his scientific work with an intensity he hadn't experienced in years. But most surprising was what happened socially. Einstein discovered that when you stop accepting emotional crumbs from false people, when you stop settling for superficial relationships based on mutual convenience, you automatically create space for relationships of completely different quality. Genuine people, Einstein realized, are like magnets. They feel attracted to other genuine people. When you stop wasting time with falseness, when you begin radiating the calm energy of someone who is no longer available for emotional games, you naturally attract people who operate on the same level of authenticity. Einstein began meeting incredible people he had never noticed before. Not because they weren't there, but because he was too busy trying to maintain false relationships to notice the genuine opportunities that existed around him. It was as if, by cleaning the emotional lens, he could finally see clearly the type of person he really wanted in his life. One of the first genuine people Einstein developed a deep friendship with was a young mathematician who worked quietly in his own office at the institute. This man had never tried to approach Einstein for personal gain, had never tried to impress him or use his fame for his own benefit. He simply worked on his equations with genuine passion for mathematics. When Einstein finally initiated a conversation with him, he discovered someone who automatically passed all his tests. When Einstein shared scientific discoveries, the mathematician got genuinely excited, asked questions out of real curiosity, offered valuable insights. When Einstein mentioned personal difficulties, the man listened with true attention and offered support without hidden agenda. And most importantly, he never spoke badly about other absent colleagues. Einstein discovered that genuine relationships have a completely different quality from relationships based on mutual interest. With authentic people, conversations flow naturally, without need for masks or performances. You can be vulnerable without fear that your weaknesses will be used against you later. You can share successes without worry of awakening envy or competition. You can count on real support during difficult moments. Even more fascinating, Einstein noticed that the more selective he became about relationships, the more attractive he became socially. People began valuing his company more, precisely because they realized he wasn't available to just anyone. It's as if scarcity created value. When you're not desperately trying to please everyone, when you have clear standards about who deserves your time, you automatically become more respected. Einstein developed what he called growing quality circle. Each genuine person he attracted to his life seemed to bring other genuine people with them. True friends have true friends. People of character gravitate around other people of character. It was as if there existed an invisible network of authenticity that extended organically. The contrast with his previous social life was striking. Before, Einstein attended social events full of people, but left feeling drained and empty. Now, he could spend an afternoon with 2 or 3 genuine people and feel energized, inspired, deeply connected. Einstein also realized he stopped worrying about quantity of relationships. Before, he felt pressured to maintain contact with dozens of people, to appear at all social events, to be accessible to any person who wanted his attention. Now, he had a smaller but infinitely more satisfying circle of deep and mutually nourishing relationships. The most liberating change was that Einstein stopped feeling guilty about not being available to people who didn't demonstrate genuine reciprocity. He understood that protecting his emotional energy wasn't selfishness, it was responsibility. Because only when you adequately care for yourself can you really be present for people who matter. If you're visualizing this type of transformation in your own life, if you can imagine what it would be like to have relationships based only on mutual authenticity, write "I want quality" in the comments. And now we reach the most powerful point: how Einstein used these discoveries to create what he called betrayal-proof relationships. How Einstein used these discoveries to create what he called betrayal-proof relationships represents perhaps the most sophisticated evolution of his entire method. And this final phase of Einstein's social development arose from a question that tormented him. If I manage to identify false people, how can I have absolute certainty that I'm building relationships that will never disappoint me? The answer Einstein developed was revolutionary because it went beyond simply filtering bad people. He created a proactive system to cultivate relationships that became stronger and more authentic over time, instead of deteriorating when tested by external pressures. Einstein realized that truly solid relationships don't happen by accident. They need to be consciously built on specific foundations that resist all types of storms: success, failure, social pressure, circumstance changes, even betrayal temptations. And the key was in something he called progressive strategic transparency. The idea was brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of revealing everything about himself at once to people who passed his initial tests, Einstein created gradual layers of vulnerability and intimacy that were unlocked only when the other person consistently demonstrated deserving the next level of trust. Einstein began with what he called basic compatibility layer, sharing opinions, tastes, superficial experiences to see if there was genuine natural connection. If the person reacted well, showed real interest, and more importantly, reciprocated with their own honest opinions without just trying to agree to please, they advanced to the next layer. The second layer was controlled vulnerability. Einstein shared small insecurities, minor fears, personal challenges that weren't too deep. He carefully observed how the person reacted. Did they offer genuine support? Did they try to help practically, or did they show discomfort, change subjects, or worse, store this information to use later during moments of conflict? People who passed the second layer were eligible for the third, operational trust. Einstein began trusting small secrets, asking for small favors, including the person in situations where they could potentially gain something by betraying his trust. It was like a laboratory test for integrity, creating opportunities where betrayal would be easy and advantageous, but where loyalty would be costly and without immediate benefit. The fourth layer was emotional interdependence. Einstein allowed himself to genuinely depend on the person during moments of difficulty and offered the same dependability in return. This level was only reached by people who had demonstrated absolute consistency in all previous layers over at least 1 year of observation. The fifth and final layer was what Einstein called perpetual alliance, a level of trust where he shared his deepest fears, most secret ambitions, most genuine vulnerabilities. Very few people reached this level, but those who did became what Einstein considered chosen family. The most brilliant aspect of this system is that it created relationships that naturally became betrayal-proof, because each person had invested so much time and energy in gradually building trust that betraying it would destroy something precious that took years to build. Einstein discovered that people who went through all these layers developed something he called organic loyalty. Not loyalty based on fear, obligation, or dependence, but loyalty that arose naturally from mutual recognition of value and authenticity. Even more fascinating, Einstein noticed that relationships built through this progressive system became practically immune to external influences. When other people tried to create intrigues, plant doubts, or cause conflicts between Einstein and his close friends, these attempts simply failed because the foundation of trust was so solid, built on so many consistent experiences, that rumors or misunderstandings couldn't shake it. Einstein also realized this system naturally eliminated the unnecessary drama that characterizes so many adult relationships. Because when you build trust gradually, testing consistency in small situations before advancing to larger situations, you eliminate the devastating surprises that destroy relationships instantly. The people in his final circle knew exactly what to expect from each other because they had been tested in dozens of smaller situations. There were no masks to fall because masks had already been gradually removed throughout the trust-building process. Einstein wrote that relationships built through this method had a quality he had never experienced before: complete emotional peace. He could be totally himself, share any thought or feeling, trust any secret, because he knew with mathematical certainty he was dealing with people who had proven their integrity repeatedly over time. If you're imagining what it would be like to have this type of absolute emotional security in your closest relationships, write, "I want that peace," in the comments. And now we reach the final, most powerful point: how you can start implementing this progressive layer system immediately, because Einstein left a specific roadmap that anyone can follow. How you can start implementing Einstein's progressive layer system immediately is simpler than it might seem, but requires something our culture of oversharing and instant relationships has made rare: strategic patience. Einstein knew that solid relationships are like fine wines. They need time to develop complexity and depth. The first step is revolutionary in its simplicity. Stop telling everything about yourself to people you just met. Einstein realized we live in a culture where people share intimate information with strangers on first meetings, reveal deep secrets to work colleagues, and put their entire lives on social media for anyone to see. This lack of privacy layers makes it impossible to build progressive relationships. Einstein created what he called the 30-day protocol for each new person who seemed to have potential to be a genuine relationship. During the first 30 days of interaction, he limited himself strictly to the basic compatibility layer, sharing only opinions about general subjects, tastes, superficial experiences, conversations about work, hobbies, culture. The objective of this first phase wasn't to impress or create forced intimacy, but to observe natural compatibility. Did conversations flow easily? Did the person show genuine curiosity about his opinions? Did they reciprocate by sharing their own perspectives honestly, or just agree with everything to please? More importantly, did they respect when Einstein didn't want to deepen certain topics? Or did they insist invasively to know more? If after 30 days the person demonstrated natural compatibility, respected limits, and showed genuine interest without being invasive, Einstein advanced to the 60-day protocol, the controlled vulnerability phase. Here he began sharing small personal challenges, minor insecurities, situations where he felt uncertain or worried. The key was in observing reactions. Genuine people offered natural support, asked caring questions, sometimes shared similar experiences to show you weren't alone. False friends reacted in 3 revealing ways. Either they showed obvious discomfort and quickly changed subjects, or they got too excited about your vulnerabilities as if they had just received valuable gossip, or they stored this information to use later during moments of conflict or competition. Einstein adapted this system to work perfectly in the modern world. At work, for example, he observed how colleagues reacted when he mentioned small professional pressures. "I'm a bit worried about tomorrow's presentation," or "this project is being more challenging than expected." Genuine colleagues offered practical help, real encouragement, or shared their own experiences with similar challenges. False colleagues either became visibly uncomfortable with any sign that Einstein wasn't perfect, or seemed secretly satisfied to know he also had difficulties. For personal relationships, Einstein tested the controlled vulnerability layer by sharing minor family concerns, insecurities about personal decisions, or small fears about the future. "Sometimes I worry if I'm making the right decisions," or "I fear I might be disappointing important people to me." True friends responded with natural empathy and often revealed similar concerns, creating genuine connection. The third phase, operational trust, is where Einstein began creating situations that tested integrity practically. He asked for small favors that required real effort, shared information that could be used against him if the person wanted, or included the person in situations where they could gain something by betraying his trust. In professional environments, this could be asking a colleague to cover an important responsibility, sharing a developing idea that could be stolen, or including someone in a meeting where they could easily take credit for Einstein's work. In personal spheres, it could be asking for help during a genuinely difficult moment, sharing a secret that could be embarrassing if spread, or entrusting the person with responsibility for something that really mattered to him. Einstein observed not just if people fulfilled these tests, but how they fulfilled them. Genuine people not only maintained trust, but frequently went beyond what was asked, demonstrating they really cared about his well-being. They protected his information as if it were their own, and offered additional support without being asked. The fourth phase, emotional interdependence, only began after at least 6 months of consistently positive tests. Here, Einstein allowed himself to genuinely depend on the person during moments of real difficulty and offered the same level of support in return. This phase created what he called deep reciprocity bonds, where both people had emotionally invested in each other in ways that made betrayal not only morally wrong, but emotionally costly. The final phase, perpetual alliance, was reserved for people who had demonstrated absolute consistency for at least 1 complete year. Einstein shared his deepest fears, most secret ambitions, most genuine vulnerabilities. Few people reached this level, but those who did became what Einstein considered true family. The most powerful aspect of this system is that it completely eliminates the possibility of devastating betrayals, because anyone capable of serious betrayal would be filtered out long before reaching levels where they could cause real damage. The only people who reach the deepest layers are those who repeatedly proved their integrity in progressively more challenging situations. If you're ready to start implementing this gradual system in your new relationships, if you want to build truly solid connections, write "I will build layers" in the comments. And now we reach the most liberating discovery. What happens when you finally have relationships where you can trust completely, without fear, without masks? What happens when you finally have relationships where you can trust completely, without fear, without masks, is an experience Einstein described as returning to emotional home. And he only fully understood the value of this transformation when he went through one of the most devastating crises of his personal life, a moment when he desperately needed genuine support and discovered for the first time that he really had it. Einstein was going through the final procedures of divorce from his first wife, a situation that was being exploited by the press in a cruel and invasive way. Simultaneously, his theories were being attacked by influential physicists who questioned not only his science but his mental sanity. And to complete the nightmare, one of his sons was going through serious health problems that required expensive and constant medical care. For the first time in his adult life, Albert Einstein found himself genuinely vulnerable, desperately needing not only practical help, but real emotional support. And it was in this moment of absolute crisis that he discovered the true value of the relationship system he had built over the years. The people who had reached the deepest layers of trust in his life reacted in a way that completely surprised him. They not only offered help, they anticipated his needs before he even asked. A close friend appeared with financial resources to help with the son's medical expenses without being asked. Another cancelled important commitments to stay with Einstein during divorce hearings. A scientific colleague publicly defended his theories at conferences, risking her own professional reputation. But what touched Einstein most weren't the grand gestures, but the emotional quality of these interactions. For the first time in his life, he could be completely transparent about his fears, his doubts, his deepest insecurities, without any fear that this information would be used against him later. He could cry in front of these people without fear of seeming weak. He could admit he didn't know what to do without fear of losing respect. Einstein discovered that relationships built on solid foundations of progressive trust create something he called emotional sanctuary. A space where you can be your most authentic and vulnerable version, knowing you'll be welcomed, not judged or exploited. The difference between these genuine relationships and the superficial friendships he had tolerated in the past was stark. During the same crisis, Einstein observed how people he considered close, but who hadn't gone through his progressive layer system, reacted in revealing ways. Some simply disappeared when they realized he was going through difficulties. Others appeared briefly with offers of help that sounded more like social obligations than genuine care. And some even began spreading gossip about his difficulties, as if his personal problems were public entertainment. But the people in his inner circle were completely different. They became closer during the crisis, not more distant. They offered not only emotional support, but defended his privacy, protected his reputation, and created a network of protection around him that allowed him to get through that devastating period without completely losing faith in human nature. Einstein realized he had inadvertently created something extraordinary, relationships that strengthened under pressure instead of breaking. Because when you build trust gradually, testing integrity in small situations before advancing to larger situations, you create foundations that can withstand any storm. Even more transformative was realizing how these relationships changed his own personality. Einstein noticed he stopped living with the constant anxiety of being betrayed, manipulated, or disappointed. This mental tranquility freed an enormous amount of energy he previously spent on constant emotional vigilance. Energy he could now invest in creativity, scientific work, genuinely pleasurable experiences. Einstein discovered that when you have relationships where you can trust completely, you develop what he called expanded emotional courage. You can take bigger risks, both personal and professional, because you know you have a genuine support network to cushion possible falls. You can be more authentic in all your interactions because you're no longer spending energy maintaining multiple versions of yourself for different people. The quality of conversations in his inner circle was completely different from anything he had experienced before. Without the need for masks or performances, discussions flowed with natural depth. They could disagree strongly without fear that conflict would destroy the relationship. They could challenge each other's ideas because they knew criticism came from a place of care, not competition. Einstein also realized these relationships created a multiplier effect in his life. When you have people who genuinely root for your success, who offer honest perspectives, who share resources and connections without hidden agenda, your opportunities expand exponentially, not through calculated networking, but through genuine collaboration. Most fascinating still, Einstein discovered his ability to detect falseness in new relationships had sharpened dramatically. When you experience real authenticity, contrast with falseness becomes instantly obvious. It was as if he had developed an integrity radar that worked automatically. The deepest transformation was realizing he stopped feeling alone, even when physically alone. He knew there were people in the world who really cared about him as a human being, who understood his complexities, who would be available if he needed them. This sensation of genuine connection created a base of emotional security that allowed a level of inner peace he had never experienced. Einstein wrote in his diary during this period, "I finally understand the difference between having many people around and having people really by your side. The first situation might be noisier, but the second is where we find true company for the soul. If you're feeling this yearning for relationships of true depth and emotional security, write 'I want that tranquility' in the comments." And now we reach the most important moment, how Einstein transformed this discovery into a legacy that can completely change your way of relating to the world. How Einstein transformed this discovery into a legacy that can completely change your way of relating to the world began with a radical decision he made at 42 years old. After experiencing for the first time what it meant to have genuinely secure and nourishing relationships, Einstein decided he would never again accept less than that in his life. And this decision wasn't just about future relationships. He took the courage to re-evaluate all existing relationships using his new standards. Einstein spent several weeks doing what he called complete relationship inventory. He listed every significant person in his life and honestly evaluated each relationship using his three fundamental questions. How did this person react to his successes? How often and for what reasons did they seek him out? How did they talk about absent third parties? And most importantly, did this relationship energize him or drain him? The results were simultaneously liberating and melancholic. Einstein discovered he was investing time and emotional energy in dozens of relationships that could never become genuinely deep, because the other people simply didn't have capacity or interest in real authenticity. Not out of malice, but due to emotional limitation, immaturity, or completely different priorities. The most courageous decision Einstein made was implementing what he called relational excellence standard. He decided he preferred having 5 true friends to 50 false acquaintances. He preferred dining once a month with people who really cared about him to attending weekly social events full of superficial interactions. He preferred deep and meaningful conversations to social chatter without substance. This transformation didn't happen without resistance. Many people in his social circle became confused and even offended when they realized Einstein was no longer available for the type of superficial relationship they had maintained before. Some colleagues interpreted his new selectivity as arrogance. Acquaintances who were used to having easy access to his attention became irritated when they discovered they needed to earn proximity through consistent behavior. But Einstein maintained his new stance with scientific determination. He had proven to himself that genuine relationships were possible and transformative. Accepting less would be like a physicist who discovered the laws of relativity deciding to return to Newtonian physics because it was more familiar and comfortable. The deepest transformation happened in how Einstein saw and valued himself. For the first time in his life, he viscerally understood that he deserved to be treated with authenticity, respect, and genuine care. He stopped settling for emotional crumbs or accepting behaviors he wouldn't tolerate if directed at people he loved. Einstein developed what he called operational self-love, not just the abstract idea that he should value himself, but concrete actions that demonstrated this value. He stopped being available to people who didn't reciprocate availability. He stopped sharing vulnerabilities with people who didn't offer vulnerability back. He stopped emotionally investing in one-sided relationships. More importantly, Einstein began radiating completely different energy. When you stop accepting falseness, when you establish clear standards about how you deserve to be treated, this becomes visible in your posture, in your way of speaking, in how you occupy space in social situations. Einstein no longer needed to strive to be respected. He was simply respected because he respected himself. This change had extraordinary cascade effects. Genuine people began naturally feeling attracted to Einstein because they recognized in him someone who operated on the same level of integrity. Better professional opportunities began appearing because he was surrounded by people who genuinely wanted to see him prosper. His scientific creativity flourished because he was no longer wasting mental energy on draining relationships. Einstein also discovered his ability to help others grew exponentially. When you're not constantly dealing with dramas and manipulations from false relationships, you have much more emotional energy available to offer real support to people who truly need and value your help. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of Einstein's transformation was that he stopped being afraid of solitude. He understood that being genuinely alone was infinitely preferable to being artificially accompanied by people who didn't really care about him. This absence of fear of solitude freed him to be completely authentic in all his interactions, because he was no longer desperately trying to maintain relationships out of fear of being alone. Einstein realized he had inadvertently created a life where every significant relationship was a source of energy, not a drain. Where he could be completely himself without fear of rejection or manipulation. Where he had people who genuinely rooted for his success and would be available during difficult moments. The deepest lesson Einstein drew from this entire journey was that quality relationships aren't luxury. They're fundamental necessity for a full and creative life. And that the only way to have quality relationships is to have enough courage to refuse low-quality relationships, even when this means periods of greater solitude. Einstein began informally teaching these principles to young scientists and colleagues he admired. He saw how many brilliant people wasted incredible potential trying to maintain relationships that emotionally drained them. And he knew that if they applied the same techniques he developed, they could free energy and creativity they didn't even know they possessed. If you're feeling you deserve relationships where you can be completely authentic, where you're genuinely valued, write "I deserve authenticity" in the comments. And now we reach the final, most powerful moment. How you can start this same transformation today, because Einstein left a specific roadmap anyone can follow to never again accept falseness in relationships. How you can start this same transformation today is simpler and more powerful than Einstein ever imagined when he first developed his method. And the most liberating aspect is that you don't need to wait months or years to see results. Changes begin the exact moment you decide to apply Einstein's standards to your own life. Einstein discovered that the deepest transformation doesn't happen when you finally identify all the false friends around you, but rather in the moment you make the conscious decision that you deserve genuine relationships. It's an internal change that instantly reflects in your external energy, in how you interact with the world, in the quality of people you attract to your life. The first practical step Einstein would recommend is what he called personal standards declaration. Take a moment today and write for yourself an honest list of what you really want in a genuine relationship. Not what you think you should want, not what other people expect you to want, but what your soul truly yearns for in terms of authentic human connection. Einstein did this exercise by writing 3 lists. How I want to feel in my relationships, how I no longer want to feel in my relationships, and what behaviors I'm willing to accept versus what behaviors I no longer accept. This clarification process was fundamental because it's impossible to create change without first having clarity about what you're seeking. The second step is to immediately implement the scientific observation protocol Einstein developed. Starting today, begin consciously paying attention to the 3 fundamental questions with all significant people in your life. You don't need to confront anyone or create drama. Simply observe with the curiosity of a scientist studying human behavior. How do close people react when you share good news? How often and for what reasons do they seek you out? How do they talk about others when those others aren't present? Einstein discovered that just the act of consciously observing these patterns already changes your perception dramatically. The third step is to start implementing progressive boundaries, gradually adjusting the level of intimacy, personal information, and emotional availability you offer to people based on what you observe about their characters. You don't need to cut anyone dramatically or create confrontations. Simply start being more selective about with whom you share vulnerabilities, for whom you're always available, and in whom you invest your most precious emotional energy. Einstein emphasized this isn't a journey of becoming a cold or closed person. It's a journey of becoming a person who values themselves enough to create space only for relationships that nourish their growth. It's the difference between being naive and being wise, between being available to anyone and being available to the right people. The fourth step is perhaps the most transformative. Start actively cultivating growing quality relationships. Instead of just filtering negative people, begin consciously investing more energy in people who pass Einstein's tests. When you identify someone who demonstrates consistent genuineness, invest more deeply in that relationship. Be more vulnerable, more available, more generous with your attention and care. Einstein realized that real transformation happens when you stop wasting energy trying to convert false friends into true friends and begin investing that energy in deepening relationships that already show genuine potential. That's where extraordinary relationships really are born. The fifth step is developing what Einstein called emotional immunity, the ability to remain centered and non-reactive when false people try to manipulate, provoke, or drag you back into old relationship patterns. When you establish higher standards, some people in your life will resist this change. They might call you changed, arrogant, or cold. Einstein learned these reactions were confirmation he was on the right path. The key is understanding that when you stop accepting emotional crumbs, when you stop being available for one-sided relationships, some people will be bothered. And their discomfort isn't your problem to solve. It's valuable information about the type of relationship they really wanted with you. Einstein also discovered this journey required what he called courage of temporary solitude. When you raise your relational standards, there might be a period where you have fewer people around you, but relationships of much superior quality. It's like cleaning a house. Temporarily it seems emptier, but ultimately becomes more harmonious and peaceful. The most empowering aspect of this transformation is that it happens gradually, naturally, without unnecessary drama. You simply begin radiating different energy, the energy of someone who values themselves, who has clear standards, who isn't available for emotional games. And this energy automatically attracts people who operate on the same level of integrity. If you feel you're ready to start this relational transformation journey today, that you deserve relationships where you can be completely authentic, write "I start today" in the comments. And now we reach the final, most important moment. Because Einstein knew that identifying false friends wasn't just about protecting yourself from bad people, it was about creating space for the type of extraordinary life that's only possible when you're surrounded by the right people. Because Einstein knew that identifying false friends wasn't just about protecting yourself from bad people, it was about creating space for the type of extraordinary life that's only possible when you're surrounded by the right people. We reach the most revolutionary insight of this entire journey, and this final discovery of Einstein will forever change how you see not only relationships, but your own potential in life. Einstein realized that every extraordinary person in history, every great scientist, artist, leader, innovator, had one characteristic in common that had nothing to do with innate talent or luck. They had developed the ability to identify and cultivate relationships with other extraordinary people while systematically protecting themselves from relationships that drained their creative energy. The most impactful revelation came when Einstein analyzed the periods of his life where he had produced his most brilliant work. Not coincidentally, these periods exactly coincided with moments where he was surrounded by people who genuinely supported his greatness, who were inspired by his success instead of resenting it, who offered energy instead of sucking energy. Einstein understood that relationships aren't just a pleasant part of life. They're the fuel that feeds or destroys our capacity to realize our maximum potential. When you're constantly dealing with people who question your dreams, minimize your achievements, create unnecessary dramas, or simply don't genuinely care about your growth, you spend an enormous amount of mental and emotional energy that could be channeled toward creation, innovation, achievement. But when you consciously surround yourself with people who really root for your success, who offer honest and constructive perspectives, who celebrate your victories as if they were their own, who are available during difficult moments, you free a creative and productive capacity you didn't even know you possessed. Einstein wrote in his final memoirs, "I discovered that the human environment we create around us determines more about our success and happiness than any other factor. You can be the most talented, but if you're surrounded by people who drain your energy, you'll never reach your potential. You can have mediocre abilities, but if you're surrounded by people who genuinely support your growth, you can achieve extraordinary results." This is the truth that changes everything. You don't need to be Einstein to apply Einstein's wisdom. The 3 questions he developed: how people react to your successes, how often and for what reasons they seek you out, and how they talk about absent third parties, are universal tools that work for anyone, in any situation, at any time. And when you begin applying these questions consciously, when you develop courage to adjust relationships based on what you discover, when you stop accepting falseness and begin cultivating authenticity, you're not just improving your social life. You're creating conditions to become the best possible version of yourself. Einstein knew that each of us has extraordinary potential waiting to be freed. But this potential remains imprisoned when we waste energy on people who don't deserve our time, attention, and vulnerability. The key to an extraordinary life isn't just developing skills or working harder. It's having enough wisdom to consciously choose who deserves access to our most precious energy. If you've come this far, if you've watched this complete masterclass on Einstein's relational wisdom, you're not an ordinary person. You're someone who understood that quality relationships aren't luxury. They're the foundation upon which every great life is built. You're someone willing to raise standards, even if it means periods of greater solitude. You're someone who prefers authenticity to popularity. Now comes the decision that will define your life's next chapter. Will you apply these lessons, or just keep this information as interesting knowledge? Will you have courage to implement Einstein's 3 questions in your real relationships? Will you start building the quality circle you deserve? If your answer is yes, if you feel you deserve relationships where you can be completely authentic, where you're genuinely valued and supported, write, "I apply the 3 questions" in the comments. When you write this publicly, you're not just commenting, you're committing to a wiser and more selective version of yourself. And if this video opened your eyes to patterns you couldn't see before, if it gave you clarity about relationships you were questioning, leave your like now. That like is your way of saying, "Yes, I deserve better relationships. I'm ready to raise my standards." In the next video, I'll reveal the 4 characteristics Einstein identified in genuinely trustworthy people, the specific traits you should look for in someone before allowing them into your inner circle. They're signs so precise that Einstein could identify people of character in a matter of minutes. If these 3 questions helped you see relationships with clarity, the 4 characteristics will give you a complete roadmap to attract only extraordinary people to your life. Einstein proved that the same scientific logic that revealed the secrets of the universe can be applied to reveal the secrets of human relationships. And now you have this knowledge. The next decision is yours. Will you use it to transform your life, or continue accepting relationships that drain your energy and limit your potential? The Einstein you can become is waiting on the other side of your next decision about relationships. And now you know exactly how to make that decision with scientific wisdom. Your relational transformation begins now. And now, my friend, we reach the most important moment of this entire journey. If you've come this far, If you've watched these Einstein lessons from beginning to end, you're not an ordinary person. You're someone who understood that quality relationships aren't luck, they're conscious choice. Someone who preferred facing uncomfortable truths to continuing to live in comfortable illusions. But here's the difference between people who just watch and people who really transform their lives. Those who really change are the ones who make the public commitment to apply what they learned. First, if you feel you deserve relationships where you can be completely authentic, where you're genuinely valued and supported, subscribe to the channel right now. It's not just to receive notifications. It's to declare you're part of a rare community of people who chose to apply scientific wisdom to build an extraordinary life. You're saying you refuse to continue accepting relationships that drain your energy. Second, in the comments, write exactly like this. I received this wisdom if this message touched something deep in you. When you write this publicly, you're not just commenting, you're committing to a wiser version of yourself. You're validating your own experience and connecting with thousands of other people who are on the same growth journey. Third, leave your like on this video. That like isn't just a number to us. It's your way of saying, yes, I deserve better relationships. I'm ready to apply Einstein's 3 questions in my life. And finally, click on the video that's appearing on your screen now. It's the direct continuation of this masterclass, where I'll reveal the 4 characteristics Einstein identified in genuinely trustworthy people. They're signs so precise he could identify character in a matter of minutes. If these 3 questions opened your eyes, the 4 characteristics will give you a complete map to attract only extraordinary people. Remember, Einstein waited decades to discover these truths. You just learned them in less than 20 minutes. Your relational transformation begins now. Click on the next video and continue your journey to a life surrounded only by people who deserve to be in it. See you on the other side, future Einstein of relationships.